What's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Blind Leading the Blind. We still have not decided who's the leader, who's the follower. Maybe it's just by consensus. Maybe it's like the Greek style of polity. Who knows? Who cares? Coming at you live from
Draw
Washington.
straws.
We draw straws. That's what we do. Coming at you live from Washington, D.C., arguably the leadership of leadership, where we have all sorts of crazy stuff going down. Go read the news if you are still living under a rock somehow. It's I, Kunal Malota, doing your writer, painter, 3D artist, programmer, all in one. I don't know how I do it all in one day. And over there in the miserable state of New Jersey, we have
Emily's Anchor, coming to you live from New Providence, New Jersey, where the weather's getting cooler, the mosquitoes are dying away, and I'm celebrating that. So I'm a writer, I'm a designer, blogger, and sometimes photographer. And I guess podcaster too, right? Since we're doing a podcast.
I guess we are a podcast for all of our subscribers out there, all over the
Yeah,
world.
there you go. We got to include that in our introduction.
I wonder if there's anyone listening to us. That's all I want to know.
Anyone where?
From Russia listening to us. Maybe it's
I
Vladimir.
don't know that. How would they find us?
Maybe Vladimir Putin's listening to us.
I guarantee you, if we did a topic on Vladimir Putin, we would get someone from Russia listening to us.
Vladimir Putin, if you're listening to us, this one's for you. No, really, it isn't. Stop it. Stop killing Ukrainians, you bastard.
And on that note,
Yes,
on that note, today's topic is
masculinity. Actually, kind of a good segue because a lot of Russian politics these days is around that sort of topic of reclaiming masculinity, interestingly enough. And, for all the jokes we made about this being for Putin, I guess this kind of is for Putin because this is advice. Fucking stop fucking up the world!
Please.
I guess today's theme is definitely going to be Russia. But anyways.
We're doing masculinity in 2025 America.
Yeah, and this actually kind of came out. We started talking about this literally yesterday, and we were like, gosh, maybe we should just talk about masculinity. And it's something that we see as becoming a bigger and more discussed thing as we talk about, you hear about the sort of male loneliness crisis, the men are falling behind crisis, the various issues. And it's very global, right? What we're American here, so for the most part, at least. So
for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. So we mostly know like a lot of the sort of more US based stuff, but it's definitely global, right? I mean, we've talked about in South Korea where a plummeting birth rate, and actually like this is part of the broader introduction in South Korea. There's a big thing where a lot of people just aren't marrying, and part of it is masculinity is part of that reason, actually. Like a lot of the toxic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because like there's a direct connection between this, I guess, quote unquote crisis of masculinity and at the same time the affordability of just living.
That too, and that's a
Right?
good one too, and we will definitely get into that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's very global, right? We see this talked about in my country of origin, India. We see it talked about in China. I'm a little less familiar with China, but Europe as well, right? It's a very interesting topic, and we are writers here, so we are going to try to tie it back to writing. So a big part of this also is media portrayals, right? Which we want to definitely touch on as well. And not just media portrayals, but the stories we tell ourselves about masculinity. So it's an interesting sort of thing. And so I guess what we really want to look into, is what's even going on? I mean, like affordability, right, is a big one, but I feel like to sort of segue into what exactly even is masculinity, right? Traditionally, I felt like it's, the sort of real manly man is the one who goes out, beats up bad guys, brings back the food home and has like the darling wife that kisses them on the cheek and says, "My hero." And I'm kind of joking a little bit. It sounds cheesy, but if you think about it, that's kind of what
Sounds like Popeye.
right. But that's kind of been the trope for like a good
Right.
few centuries, right? If you look at
So like physical dominance, provider,
loyal
loyal to
defender.
in a certain right.
I mean, and it's interesting, like if you think I'm joking, right? But look at, some of the media sort of the more like well-known media types who are of dudes are who are, like considered aspirational. I mean, I grew up watching a lot of James Bonds. That's one of the first ones that comes to mind. You
Yeah,
know,
James Bond's like one of the OG masculine archetypes.
absolutely, right? Like he's the guy who goes out, saves the world, kicks ass, gets a kiss on the cheek from the woman.
Hmm.
And if you think about it, right, like there's a lot to be said about how, I mean, there's a lot of things about James Bond now that we actually do rightfully so cringe about. But for a long time, he was the sort of one of the sort of, aspirational things that a guy wanted to be, suave with a nice car,
Hmm.
etc. Fun fact,
Hmm.
your listener, um, one of the reasons that Ford created the Mustang actually was James Bond.
Oh, the more you know.
What happened was that baby boomers had a ton of kids, right? Like there were a ton of kids, right, from in the baby boomer generation. They were growing up. They had money, one of the first generations in America to have money, but they didn't want boring ass Fords, right? They wanted sexy, right? And
Hmm.
James Bond was very popular at that time, still is, but at that time especially, he was one of the most popular, like, which is why I keep talking about him. He's actually a very influential character. Um, and what does James Bond drive? He doesn't drive a Ford, he drives an Aston Martin, right? So they wanted a sexy sport.
Hmm.
But to continue,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think like if we're talking about the definition of masculinity in 2025, I think it's really difficult to define it in the moment right now because I feel like we're kind of in a transition state, right?
that's
So
true.
like, we talk about James Bond, we talk about like Popeye or like these, previously very, I don't know, venerated is the right, admired, I should say, admired versions of
Venerated
like
is the
what
right word.
masculinity is.
No,
It
venerated.
is, yeah.
So
You
yeah,
think so? Okay.
I
In
mean,
in some regards, yeah.
and I
But
should
now,
let me also
mhm.
like add one other note to that. I mean, like I said, my country origin is India, and like if you look at some of the male stars over there, right, some of them are quite literally worshipped. Like there's a very famous actor in the South. I'm not very familiar with South Indian films because I'm actually not from South India, but there's a very famous actor. His name is Rajnikant, and my understanding is that they would actually have like a prayer thing before his movie
Oh
release.
wow.
Like he actually got when you talk about idol worship, this guy was actually worshipped. So yeah, in some cases, I
What was his name?
Rajinikanth. So he's pretty famous.
Hmm.
If you look him up, you'd probably be able to find stuff about him. But like,
That's actually really interesting because I would love, maybe not exactly right now, but later on, I would be interested in understanding like how masculinity is like portrayed maybe in Hollywood versus Bollywood.
well, this is South Indian cinema, technically not Bollywood, but yeah, similar.
Well, I wouldn't.
There's a
I'm
distinct.
not very familiar,
There's a
but still,
distinct.
like cross-cultural comparisons of masculinity
Absolutely,
would be
but
very interesting to me
but
because
I do agree
one,
with
I
you.
won't talk. Mhm. Yeah, I won't talk too much about it now because we're gonna get to it later on. But one of the things I think about is like K-pop Demon Hunters, and so like it's kind of top of mind for me because I watched it recently.
Love
Or
it.
even like when I was younger, and you'd see like the male protagonists in anime, and you could definitely tell that. Like I used to say to some of my friends, like I can't tell if this is a guy or a girl in this like manga comic because the hair is so long and he looks so pretty and like,
I
but
agree.
like really, right? So like maybe that looks something that looks like feminine from Western lens is definitely not that elsewhere. So that's something we'll touch on later on. But what I was trying to say about masculinity in 2025, at least in America, is that like right now I do think that we're right in the middle of a transformation because you have like so like we're millennials, right? And so you have the millennials, you have the what's the generation before us, Kunal?
The generation before us would be Gen
Yeah,
X.
not boomers, X, right? It's boomers, then X, then millennial, right?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, we're technically
Yeah, and then I'm at the cusp of millennial. I'm like the last year for
we're
millennial.
both
If
millennials.
I was born, yeah, so we're both zillennial. So if I had been born a year later, I'd be technically Gen Z. And there you go, listeners. Now you know exactly how old we both are.
Old.
But
Our teeth are
yeah, so
falling out.
basically our teeth are falling out. Yeah, I mean, I think I pulled something in my hip the other day. I did not, I jest.
Everyone,
But the point is
Gen
that
Z,
like,
young Gen Z people, for those of you out there, just so you know, when you hit 30, it's downhill.
okay, you're gonna pull me off on a tangent, but I read something recently that said like after age 30, the majority of people do not sprint ever again. And I read that, I'm like, no, I need to sprint now. And so like after that, I
I'm
think
here
like
with those
2 days
motherfuckers.
later, I went on a run. I went on a run and I ended that freaking run with a sprint, and I'm like, not me, baby.
Oh.
Not me.
Dear listener, Emily is going to prove the science wrong.
I already did, so what now? But anywho,
Anywho,
um,
masculinity.
masculinity, and yeah, so like how the definition of masculinity or changes through generations as well. So like what would be a masculine guy to a Gen Z person is might not be the same to a millennial person. And then also considering the cycle, right, of masculinity. So like maybe something that a boomer thought was masculine, maybe a Gen Z person is refining that to be masculine.
Sure.
Because this idea of masculinity very much is a cultural byproduct, and culture in itself is shaped by political events,
So,
right?
I mean,
And so,
wait, all right. I'll give you an interesting point on that, actually. For a long
mhm,
time, it was very much not masculine to be into materialism, right? To like want material shit. That was considered a very feminine thing, actually. And then businesses are like, you'll see where I'm going with this. Businesses are like, well, that's not good.
right.
We need to make money. So the reason that cars are such a masculine thing actually is that businesses realize that we need a market to men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like for a long time in history, like most of like, the more, collectory type things tended to not be masculine. I don't have a source on this,
I
but
didn't know that. Yeah, I was gonna say like,
I could
really?
be
Because
wrong.
I can always imagine. I think what people collected was definitely gendered and still is, right?
Well,
Because like there's, mhm.
also fun fact actually, I mean jewelry for a long time was not a feminine thing. It was actually a masculine thing, like rings. I mean, for dear listener, I have many
At
rings.
what point?
And in like the Renaissance era or in the medieval ages, actually jewelry was more worn by men actually.
Men?
And
Oh.
especially like in the more quote unquote exoticized Oriental cultures, right? You'll notice that a lot of the men are drawn as a little bit more effeminate. And a big part of the reason is that these were,
Effeminate in a Western lens.
yeah,
From a
exactly.
Western lens. Mhm.
And a lot of the reasons also is that historically these were very much more wealthier cultures. So like especially in India, right? Men would be decked out in jewels, right?
Oh, I
Like
see.
gold jewelry, whatnot. I mean, Indians still love their jewelry, but
Mm.
like it's
So
so,
it was more a symbol of like wealth. And so the having wealth was associated with being more masculine.
and in certain cultures, yes, and what
Okay.
ended up happening, like with Orientalism, actually, right? Like the reason that there's like you'll notice in a lot of old school Orientalism, sorry, in a lot of old school Orientalist sort of depictions, which are now considered racist. You'll notice that men are drawn as more effeminate. They have more, manicured nails or this and that, whereas, the manly man is the one who's like hard and brawny and whatnot. And I was actually watching a breakdown of what's realistic about the film 300. And 300 leans into this, actually. You'll notice that Xerxes is very
Yeah. He's
feminine.
very decked out in
Right?
jewels and he has got the makeup on and
And there's a reason for this, right? And that's true.
yeah.
They did have a lot of wealthy sort of displays of wealth because they were wealthier nations. Persia historically was wealthier than Greece. So was South Asia. So was China, right? Or East
Hmm.
Asia generally. And so, in a way to show themselves as better, it would be this whole thing came up of like, well, we're not into that. We don't need that. We just have muscles, right?
Mm,
We can
yeah.
better than they can. And so that's where that depiction sort of shows up initially. That being said, however, historically it was pretty normal for men to wear a lot of
Well,
jewelry.
it's really interesting, right? So, like, if we're gonna talk about having a bunch of jewelry and displaying, I guess, wealth in that way, and considering that to be a masculine thing versus a man just, being rugged and maybe a little dirty and just like super muscular, one of those is much more easily accessible to a
Absolutely.
lot of people.
And I agree.
And
That's
it's
the
not the jewels.
right. I mean, well, Absolutely, I do agree with you that like that's the other thing about, and to sort of segue into like one of the issues on masculinity today, or I guess in this transition phase, traditionally we've seen masculinity as being the case of the provider, the breadwinner. I mean, to quote South Korea, right? A big part of the reason that marriages are not happening or people aren't having kids is because, the man is supposed to own a house before he gets married. Now, ain't nobody got the money for that. Come on. You ever been to Seoul?
I laugh, but it's also through tears.
Right, like, I mean, like, I'm sure that you listeners, you're listening, right? And you're like, yeah, no, that's a little ridiculous, right? Wherever you are. I mean, there are parts of the world where this is not as big a deal, but go to Seoul one of these days. I've never been, but like, if you've ever been to Seoul or if you've even watched some videos about it, I mean, heck, the film Parasite touches on this a little bit, right?
Mm,
I'm not big on
great
like,
film.
I mean, I haven't seen it. I'm not huge on a lot of Korean stuff,
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah,
but.
it's really good. I mean,
uh,
I only watched it one time, but anyway, continue.
But I mean, I'm not really especially big on like Korean media personally. Not for any other reason. It's just not something that interests me personally.
I am, if
Uh,
you're interested in that, dear listener.
I mean,
I got into it during the pandemic of Train to Busan and I never went back.
yep. I mean, that's how it goes for a lot of people, right? I mean, I've got my other interest, but the point is that like Seoul is fucking expensive, right? Like
Mm,
South Korea in general is very expensive. Who the fuck has the money for like, you know? owning their own house over there, right? And if they
yeah.
do, they probably sold their left testicle for it. I mean, like to be honest with you, right? Like
Not
specifically,
the right one,
yeah, specifically the left one,
because
right?
that would be wrong.
That would be wrong. It's three lefts make a right after all. So, so
Are we just casually laughing about this?
you
It's
know,
actually so sad. It's actually awful.
I mean, dark humor is a thing. As I told my other friends, I mean, people who know me well, they'll know even in times of crisis, I am making jokes.
This
But
is
still,
true.
it's true. I mean, there are stories, but they will be reserved for maybe when we're all drunk.
Sometimes, sometimes we need to laugh so we don't cry, right?
But so the point being, though, that like a big part of the issue with that sort of idea, and you see it even in Western culture, where the man should be, a big manly man earns a lot of money, a big manly man has a lot of nice shit. That's tough in today's world, right? Like that's a very hard thing to achieve.
So you know what's interesting? I would say that I grew up kind of with like I don't want to say outdated, but more old-fashioned views on what's femininity and masculinity.
Mm.
I could go on. Okay, I'll try and stay focused here. Basically, I don't think that I grew up thinking that a very masculine man necessarily had to be very rich, actually.
Sure, sure. I mean,
So I
looking,
think probably, yeah,
yeah,
so like, so growing up again, I grew up in a more conservative environment, I would say. I mean, I went to Catholic school for like 12 years. I definitely think my dad, who, obviously he was my first example of like what's masculinity, what's a man, right? He, I think he definitely put this idea of like a masculine man being like strong, like physically strong, a masculine man being not actually caring a lot about, is his hair done super well? Like, is he
yeah.
wearing the most fashionable things? So I think I had in my head the old archetype of like a manly man without the jewels and the money and that stuff
Well, I would
attached.
argue that it's not necessarily about jewels and money, but the idea of being a provider, right? That's tough in today's world. Like being,
I think I didn't even I mean, I don't know. This is me back when I was like a teen, right? So like maybe I wasn't thinking about men as providers because I was a teenager and like I literally my brain wasn't like, oh, is he a provider? Because I was not in a position in my life where I'm like, oh, is he gonna provide for me? And like if we have a family, like I wasn't there.
sure,
Um,
that is a big part of it, I feel like, right? Like
yeah.
today in 2025. It is interesting you talk about like fashion, right? Like one of the things my girlfriend points out to me, right, is that most men see that there are maybe not most, but there are a lot of guys who will quote unquote say that they're proud of not giving a shit about how they look and that
Yeah. Yeah.
actually look into male fashion.
That's where the term I feel like we've talked about this before, but have you heard the term metrosexual?
I have not heard that term, no. Well, I have
So
heard. I don't know what it means actually.
yeah, so my understanding of the term, I actually had a roommate who told me this when I was like 22, 23. So metrosexual is basically like a guy who definitely does care about how he looks. He like grooms himself very well. He'll go and get his nails done. Like he's very clean, very put together, very fashionable, very like with it in terms like a guy who maybe has a very nice, I'll say penthouse, but he has a very nice apartment in like New York City, and he's very
Oh,
culturally with it.
I see. I see.
And yeah, so like that, but it's interesting that we call them a metrosexual,
I
right?
was
It's
gonna
like we even
say,
have to come up
yeah,
with a term for that,
yeah,
and it
that's weird.
has to end with the word sexual.
Well, TIL, that I might be on that spectrum, but okay. Today I learned, dear listener, on
Did
this
you get your
podcast.
nails done, Kunal?
Yeah, maybe I should. Today I learned on this podcast, dear listener, I might be metrosexual.
Yeah, you could get them buffed actually. You don't even get them polished. I learned about this. It was so cool. There's like nail buffers. And no, I'm so for real. It's really cool because you don't have to paint your nails. It just makes them shiny.
I don't know if I go that far personally. Shiny nails might be a little much, but I mean, I do like my rings. I have my ears pierced, right? Like, I definitely might be somewhere on the spectrum, dear listener. Like, like,
A little
I
metro, a
care
little
about how I
metrosexual.
look. I put some energy, and I mean, now my girlfriend's also like doing the whole, throwing out my old wardrobe and getting me all sorts of new stuff.
Well, I
So.
do feel like you're more metrosexual since entering a relationship, though.
Yes and no. Like I definitely had a bit of a moment when I was back in San Francisco where I realized that like I need to change my look. And I started paying a bit
Mm.
more attention. So like I don't that's a very weird thing though that we term that, right? And it goes to show
Yeah,
you how weird the definition of masculinity is, right? I didn't even know about this until this podcast, literally just now. And it's just bizarre, right? Like, I mean, caring about your appearance means that you have a particular term for yourself. I,
right.
that's very unnatural.
Well, right. It's like the idea that you care about your appearance can even affect your sexuality, right? So like it ends in the word sexual, right? And here, this is actually going to draw back to the outline that we have.
It's
So the
probably
question was like, why is masculinity like even worth having, right? So
yeah,
I would argue that a lot of guys would say, well, I want to be masculine because I want the girls to like me. Like I want to be attractive to women. I think a lot of guys would agree with that statement.
yeah,
Hopefully,
sure.
correct me in the comments if you disagree. But it's funny because it's like, okay, so you're saying that if a guy just cares about his appearance, that makes him more effeminate, and therefore, if he's more effeminate, then he's not into women as much. But it's so funny because
All right.
women
Yeah.
actually like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, right? Like, because I mean, my mind's blown by this because my girlfriend has been telling me this is a thing, but part of me is like, I can't believe this. And now you're telling me the same thing, and I'm like, I still can't believe this because like those people that you aspire to, like Henry Cavill or Daniel Craig or I don't know, The Rock, right? Or John
Mm.
Cena. You think that they are not
John Cena.
well, he's an actor now.
I know. It was just like to be fair, you did say The Rock, so I guess John Cena is the natural
Well, I
follower.
mean, the reason I'm saying this, there's a specific reason I'm taking those names in particular because you laugh.
Okay.
You think that they don't obsess over their appearance? They absolutely do. They have people hired for this, right?
Hmm.
Have stylists who style them. They don't walk out of bed looking like The Rock or John Cena, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they have people who like every tiny aspect of their appearance is put together. This to me is a little bizarre, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think it does go to show you where the problem with masculinity really is that we're chasing a metric, right? And this is something we talk about in the tech world too. I mean, I'm a software engineer, guys, so I fully apologize to the humanities people out there who are like la 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 no tech no tech.
I heard the word metric. Ew.
Ew, cringe.
Ew.
Someone's got the runs now. So I fully apologize, but like we were talking about this in tech interviews, right? Where one of the things, and I've joked with Emily about this, where one of the things that a lot of my tech friends will know, many companies love something called leet code. Now, what is leet code? It's basically these small programming solve problems you have to solve, which are meant to test your algorithmic thinking. Now, is it an indicator of how you work on a day-to-day basis? For those of you who are in writing, it's like writing a limerick for a marketing job. Like in a live interview. It is really that stupid, in my opinion. Now, but that said, it does give some signals in the sense that do you understand, like just like with a limerick, right? Like, do you understand how to write things that are catchy? Or in the case of programming, do you understand how to write code that is efficient and how to do so with like, the proper tool for the job? Now, that said, what's happened now is that a lot of people are still getting hired who really are not very good engineers. They're just good at solving these problems, right? And that's what I
Oh,
mean.
I see where you're going with this.
That's what I mean by like, chasing the metric, right? Which is that masculinity, right? People are chasing a metric, right? Which without really understanding what it means, right? The idea of like, the ideas of like, maybe projecting strength or being like a provider are not bad on their own, right? It's when we take it to the extreme and when we try to dismiss everything else in the name of like this thing. Like, you can be a provider and look good too, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with this.
Hmm.
You can be a
Well,
man. Yeah. All right,
yeah, the other thing.
and maybe the provider part I can
Mhm.
miss too. To be very clear, right? But you can have masculine traits. You can be like, your prototypical male and still like to look good. I mean, that's just stupid, frankly speaking, right?
I have so many thoughts. So,
Yeah, let's
the
let's hear
first thought is when you were talking about how basically John Cena or The Rock, right? They put so much effort into caring about their appearance. The funny part about that to me is that the guys that you maybe like John Wayne or even like Pedro Pascal, right? Like in The Last of Us, I would argue he's like, he's one of the archetypes of like a very masculine man. That dirtiness, that ruggedness, that like worn through toughness, that was also an intentional like
exactly,
decision. That was
exactly.
an intentional decision to make them look that way. So whether the guy has like the perfect skin and his teeth are shining and his nails are shining and his hair is beautifully oiled versus the guy who looks like he just crawled out of, I don't know, a hole and he's got like a gun slung over his shoulder. If you're watching that on screen, if you're seeing that in a magazine, arguably in some cases, even in a book, right?
Right.
That was designed. That was a very intentional thing that this
100%.
creator, that this publisher, that this, whoever the person behind this character is, they designed him in that way.
100%. Yeah.
So that's effort.
I mean,
Putting forth effort in both, masculine versions, right?
absolutely, I agree.
Um,
Somebody like I do a lot of character art, right? These decisions are very deliberate, right? There is
mhm,
care taken. Not caring about your appearance is a very
mhm,
I'm very mind blown that this is actually apparently a part of prototypical masculinity. I mean, and
mhm,
to
mhm,
me, it is kind of idiotic. I mean, okay, like
mhm.
Johnny Bravo, masculine dude out there who's listening to this podcast,
Johnny Bravo.
who wears shitty ass underwear wherever he goes. Just so you know, I think you're dumb.
So the other thought that I had, was basically, it's funny how, if we're going to talk about, if we're going to answer the question, why does masculinity even matter? Why is it important? Why does anyone try to become more masculine or achieve masculinity?
Well,
And so if we're going to focus on the answer, which is, oh,
okay.
to like,
I didn't want to interrupt that. There is a very,
hmm,
it's just power, right? It's power and control. Power means control, right? I mean, why do you want to be masculine? Because it represents power of a kind, right? Like cultural power, potentially, and that's a kind of control.
oh, so we're,
You,
yeah, that's a whole other aspect. Yeah. Um, I'll get to that because I do think that's a big driver for why some people are chasing masculinity. But if we're just talking about being attractive to heterosexual women, the funny thing is that like I think when a lot of guys try to chase this masculine ideal that's been put forth by other men, I think sometimes they're appealing more to other men than they are actually to the heterosexual women. And I think that's just very ironic. Furthermore, I think that they're assuming that all heterosexual women kind of operate in the same way. So, like, okay, I don't know, maybe we're going to have listeners who are going to disagree with me on this point, but I think I can say I think there's been a lot of research on this. But for the point of this podcast, I'll say I think gender is actually, it is a spectrum. How you present, that's a spectrum, right? So, like, you can have a woman who is extremely heterosexual,
Yeah, but she
but
presents
she
her.
just, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've
And
never,
maybe
I've
she's
never met
not
her.
interested. Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I would say I was someone like that when I was younger. I was very tomboyish, and I only just recently started like willingly wearing skirts when I don't have to because I just felt more comfortable in pants. So, I mean, there's a whole thing I can go into about me, but I don't want to focus on that. But the point is that men don't have to fit this one particular idea of masculinity in the hopes that like, oh, if I do that, then at least 80 years and the majority of women will be attracted to me because
Yeah.
that's just not true because that's treating women like a monolith.
Well, what's
And
interesting,
that's like half the population of the world. So like that's not wise.
millions and billions of women, right? Like that's interesting. We talk about this.
Right.
Historically, I have found that femininity, maybe recently, maybe not always, but more recently, femininity has been a little bit more, has a lot more freedom, I think, in how it's expressed. And I absolutely agree with you that there can be very, heterosexual women, but they wear pants and like jeans or like very loose fitting clothes, which are not traditionally very feminine in some senses, but it's kind of accepted, right? There is something there, I think, also, which is like probably a power dynamic, right? But because to some guys that
I
is,
have thoughts. I have thoughts on why it's more
I suspect,
acceptable
I
for
suspect that,
women.
I suspect that for some guys it's just appealing, right? Um, you know, and I actually do think it's probably a patriarchal thing, but that's my theory. But
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think it's a patriarchal thing.
I suspect
Basically,
that.
everyone's always like everyone assumes basically the default's male. So
Exactly.
so this reminds me of a book I read by Carolyn Criado Perez. And I forgot the title of the book, but basically it was like um basically we are in a world designed for men and like how women fit into that world designed for men. And basically I think the reason why even okay, I'll go there. A lot of times very heterosexual men will be like totally fine with like lesbian stuff,
I
but
was
like if
gonna
they see a
actually go
gay
there too.
guy,
I was gonna
right,
go there.
right. But like if they
That's
see
what I was
two gay
thinking.
guys, it's like exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's the same kind of thing that makes it okay for a woman to present, like physically present in a way that's more masculine
Yeah.
versus a man physically presenting in a way that's more feminine.
I
And
mean,
at the end of the day, I think it's,
yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, it's very apropos for this conversation, right? Where,
right.
female sexuality especially, right? Like where if we hear about like, oh, there are definitely circles which and maybe not everyone, there are very conservative people who are very unokay with this, but if you hear that
Yeah.
this woman is totally heterosexual, but she explored her sexuality with another woman. And there are definitely a lot of parts of the population which are like, no, that's okay. That seems pretty normal. But if a guy does that,
Hmm.
like then like that guy's automatically just gay, right? Like, and like
Hmm.
it's a very interesting dichotomy, and it does tie into like how masculinity is very narrowly defined, right? Especially compared to femininity.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is a patriarchal thing where for some guys, right, like the idea of a woman exploring her sexuality with another woman is very appealing, I think, right? For some guys, right?
Hmm.
I mean, like to go into that topic, and it's the same thing with why tomboys are kind of appealing, and there's a lot more spectrum and diversity with how femininity presents, right? Whereas if a
Hmm.
guy comes along wearing, having like, I mean, you heard my own discomfort just earlier at the idea of like getting my nails painted, right? Like, guy comes along
Hmm.
with nails, and I'm dead serious when I say this, right? Guy comes along with painted nails, right? That's very not masculine, and it's very like
Hmm.
makes people feel weird, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Even though if you think about it, right, like, a guy painted his nails, so what? Right? Like,
Right.
right,
Like it's not like right. But like
right,
I think also that's like it's like a cultural signifier.
right. And
Like,
a lot of it comes down to that the idealized male is one very specific definition. And I'm going to tie it back to my sort of initial point, right? And also tie it into fiction, right? When you look at, the traditional fictional males that are considered powered, right? Like in
hmm.
prehistory and like mythology, you have Achilles, Odysseus, right?
Hmm.
In sort of even more mythological in the founding of Rome, I think who was it? He was raised by wolves. I believe was the
Oh, Romulus.
Romulus. Yes, Romulus. He was raised by wolves, right? You know,
Yeah.
very, very like masculine kind of guys would have a lot of power and whatnot. It really does. And if you look at even more modern portrayals, John Wayne, right? Quick slinger,
Hmm.
quick draw with a gun, James Bond, like this
It's
suave.
actually really interesting to talk about like the masculinity that came out of like the wild, wild west,
It's interesting, right?
like
And James Bond.
backdrop.
It's interesting because like there is a difference, right? James Bond is very British. I mean, we associate with like, very refined, urbane, elegant, whereas John Wayne,
Yeah.
American masculinity is very frontier spirit, down in the woods, doesn't care about anything. It really ties into his power, right? Like what all these things have in common is that these are people who are very, very, very powerful, right? Like in the
Hmm.
and the reason that power is appealing is because it means you have control over your outcome, over your destinies, right? It's a hard thing, right? I mean, it's one of the things, and this is going to get very deeply existential and philosophical for a minute, but the reality is that, no, I'm not really joking. Like we are living now more than ever, we're living in a time in which we don't really have a lot of control over outcomes, right? And so being robbed of control makes people feel powerless. People don't like feeling powerless. They don't like feeling helpless, especially when the archetypal male is someone who goes out, kicks ass, takes names, gets a kiss on the cheek at the end of the day, and that's that, right? So a lot of what these sort of things are, they promote the concept of being able to control, and it's interesting. It does make sense, right? Patriarchy is a lot about
Hmm.
the male figure controlling, right? Um,
Hmm.
so that's, I
It,
think, what.
it's interesting what you're saying because it's so, you know, before we talked today, I told you I was watching that Andrew Tate interview.
Right.
And so, dear listeners, I don't typically listen to Andrew Tate. I
I
was
mean, I
watching
think we'd
his,
all be surprised if you do. I mean,
if
like
I was like a big Andrew Tate
that would be
fan.
very
No,
funny. I have to say,
I, okay, so there are the names out there that you'll hear. And for example, so like, I don't typically listen to Joe Rogan. I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast episode in totality, last week. I don't typically listen to Andrew Tate, but I started watching one of his interviews and today. And what was really interesting to me, what really struck me is that when they talk about why they say what they say and why they send the messages that they do to their followers, their listeners, their supporters, they really touch on very real topics. So, for example, Andrew Tate. So he was talking about basically why he started his university. He started a university. He like teaches people
all
like
sorts
how
of
to make money. Hmm.
all sorts of questionable things. I have read about them, but yeah,
Yeah, so so this is him in his words on this interview. I could link it below our video today. But basically, he was talking about how he started the university because he wants to teach people how to make money without having to quote unquote waste money and time in like a 4-year university and get a useless degree, quote unquote.
right.
But what was really interesting, I actually found compelling, was that he touched on something that people really are feeling, right? There used to be a time where it's like, okay, if you go to college, you work hard, come out, you get a good job, like you'll have a stable life, like you'll be successful.
Absolutely.
And that reality is not necessarily true anymore. And
Yeah,
so Andrew Tate, he's identifying that, he's seeing that frustration in people and he's speaking to it. Same
absolutely.
thing with,
Logan.
same thing with Joe Rogan. So I think it was an interview he was doing with Bernie Sanders, an American politician. For anyone who happens to be listening to this and doesn't know Bernie Sanders because you're not from America, he's a more progressive politician. And Joe Rogan was saying he was touching on how basically there's a lot of mistrust among Americans for politicians and potential corruption.
Mm,
And, you know, like what are our tax dollars going to if we're still having certain issues that every American can feel, but nothing's changing. So
right.
I don't necessarily agree with what he's proposing in response to that feeling, but he touched upon something which is very real and very valid and right.
And I mean, this is something that, dear listener, we actually had a small conversation about before the show yesterday, where we talked about how, like, a lot of political stuff these days is not especially like relevant really to the average person, right? Like, you know, for all of us, what we really care about is that like groceries are getting more expensive, rent is more expensive, buying a house is kind of hard, right? And
Mm.
the thing is that like a lot of the times that this masculinity debate, when they make it about masculinity, what they're really doing, right, is they're touching on these issues, right? A lot of the
Yeah.
provocateurs out there, they're touching on issues that feel very relevant, right?
Hmm.
To it touches on the wider crisis, which is that, it's a lot harder to make it in this world. What's more, I mean, I have another thought, which this may be a little bit more like, I don't want to say controversial, but it is a little bit more of a hot take, which is that really what I think a lot of what we're seeing is that there was a time in the 1950s, right, where in America especially, right? If you were a male, you were heterosexual, right? And you were also white, it was very hard to fail, right? Like it was a very much of the golden age of American exceptionalism, right? There are a lot of reasons for this, which I think maybe are out of the scope for this particular podcast. But what has really happened in the time since is the world changed, right? And
Mm.
a lot of what's happened is that we have really failed as a society to keep up with those changes in some ways. We're clinging to some things we shouldn't be clinging to, but at the same time saying that some things are irrelevant, right? Um, what's I think what's interesting is I read this actually it was in a book or it's in a book The Earth is Flat by Tom Friedman. He's not a flat earther, just so you know. He's an economist.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer, he's not a flat earther. For you out there, Johnny Bravo, who thinks the earth is flat, no, I'm not endorsing flat earth stuff. But he's an economist, or I think he's an economist, something along those lines. He's pretty well known. He kind of predicted in some ways a lot of what we're seeing today. Not exactly the way we were seeing it, but he did predict that people are not prepared, right, for what's coming. And this was like back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, because the world moved on, right? And I think a lot of people mentally didn't. So
Why
masculinity,
why do you think he why do you think he was he saying that the world moved on, the world is changing much faster than it was in the past? Is
yeah,
that Mhm.
exactly, right? I mean, Tom Friedman's whole point was that that the world is getting smaller. When he said the Earth is
Right,
it's getting smaller, competition
right.
is increasing, right? Like, and in general, and this is getting a little bit more into economics, and there's also a technological aspect, but I mean, in the 1950s, right after World War II, America was basically the only industrial nation that existed, right? I mean,
Hmm.
Europe was still rebuilding. Japan was also rebuilding, right? The rest of the world was freshly out of colonialism, right? That has changed, right? I mean, like we're no longer in that world. Europe is a pretty vibrant place. It has its issues, right? I mean, arguably now the former colonial nations are taking more and more of an important role. And this isn't to say that that people in those places are equally not experiencing this masculinity crisis, but what's happened is that on top of that, now we actually educate women, something we didn't do honestly before
Hmm.
back in the 1900s, especially, right? I mean, and even in the 1950s, the very prototypical woman was in America was, the one who's at home cooking and like, managing the house, right?
It was actually really interesting on that note. So
Yeah.
during World War II, obviously a lot of American men went off to fight in the war.
Yeah.
And as a result, many women actually moved into the workforce.
Yeah.
But when World War II ended, the men came back home and they needed jobs. So there was actually a very conscious, I don't know if I should use the word campaign, but there was a very conscious effort
Yeah.
to get women back into the house. So
Yeah.
there were plenty of ads that went out, a marketing campaign that went out that was sort of romanticizing the
Right.
idea of the woman going back into the home and because they needed it to be that way. They needed the men
Right.
to come back and feel like they could contribute and support the family.
Right.
So it's actually interesting because I don't know, we forget necessarily, but like in the 1940s in America, like women were working.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were working in the factories. They were working in the weapons factories.
Or the
I
River,
mean,
right?
look, Rosie the Riveter, exactly. And then suddenly it's like, oh, did the woman's capabilities change? Like her role in life just changed just because the men returned. Like,
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to point out on about, right, the 50s. I think what we also forget is that in that time, institutions were very much set up to benefit a certain class of people. I mean,
yeah.
there are going to be a lot of people who kick, scream, and cry and shit their pants over me saying that, right? But that is the reality, right? Like,
Actually, sorry, on that note, is a very, very quick interlude.
any
Did
pants?
you know that no. Did you know that the IT industry was actually first considered very feminine?
I
I
would,
would say probably in the last 10 years, it's been considered very masculine, very male dominated. But
yeah,
originally, it was very feminine because it was, so basically, they always considered like the secretary, like a feminine job, right?
yeah. I mean, it's
When
typing.
the compute right when the computers came on the scene, it was a very feminine thing to do, to sit there and type and jot things down. Once I think, well, I don't want to say men, but our society realized, oh shit, like this is something that's actually really cool, very lucrative, very like future thinking.
Yeah.
They were like, okay, wait a minute, no, this is a male dominated profession. And they started pushing men into that field and women out of it.
Oh, I mean, if you even look at like historical depictions of like nerds in the 80s, right? Like they often were people who were again effeminate, right? Like they were, if you look at like the sort of the kind of guys that got picked on in those high school drama films, right? Effeminate guys with giant glasses who just only knew how to type, right? They didn't have brawn, right? You know,
Mm,
and so I could totally see it. I totally am not surprised that the IT industry would be considered very effeminate.
hmm
I think like it's again like this ties back in again to my point about that really it's about power, right? The problem
hmm
I think is and what I'm trying to drive at is that a lot has changed since the 1950s. Not just, not just like, institutions are no longer the way they used to be, right? Like women
hmm
are getting educated more, right? There's a much higher labor force participation rate for women in a lot of Western countries, especially. Um,
hmm
so it's not necessarily true for some Asian nations, but there's, income is now actually the income power is now actually higher among women than it is among men, right?
hmm
Um, and that's largely because like, there are that's largely because we still cling to some somewhat outdated ideas, right? And there's also the fact that like and on top of that, competition has increased, right?
hmm
I mean, back in the 50s, there was really only America, and that's about it, right? Now, you have people that one job opening you see on LinkedIn. I've been searching for a job, right? And it's like, well, there's a tons of applicants. It's like, why? And then it only recently clicked me. It's like, oh, because people all over the globe are applying for these jobs.
hmm hmm
Like the old days of like, where it was just you competing with some kid down the street and that's it, right? All
hmm
gone, right? Like there's number one, there's a much higher skill floor that's needed to be able to generate any kind of income, right? It wasn't enough just to walk into a factory, get a job, and like, you can own a
hmm
house. That's gone.
hmm
I mean, manufacturing has long since left America. And so the point being that like, the crisis that we see with masculinity right now, right, is that we're stuck between, we haven't really defined a new form of masculinity, right? I would argue, right? Where it's that one which is more inclusive, one which is more empathetic, because empathy apparently is a dirty word.
So I do think that in some play, maybe Gen Z and a little bit of tail end of millennials and Gen Z, I do think that we are kind of embracing a different idea of masculinity, one that is more like emotionally intelligent, perhaps, one
Right.
that's not so scared about the prospect of being too feminine, right? But what's really interesting to me is that in moments of crisis, in periods of turmoil, in places that are quite hard to survive, to live, to feel safe, right? I think sometimes we kind of find comfort, and I say we as like maybe a society, we find comfort in going back to stricter, more black and white roles. And I
Well,
think
the,
stricter black and white roles are in this context like the man being the very, very manly man, and the woman being the very, very feminine woman, and not really blending those roles in any regard, right? But so it's the attraction to extremes. And I personally think the more open-minded, the more healthy, the more tolerant place to be is somewhere in between, where men are not scared of maybe embracing some of their inner feminine, and women are not scared of embracing some of their inner masculine. But again, when we get to places, time periods where life feels uncertain, or things feel scary, or things feel unpredictable, or like things are not safe, people very often find comfort in the black and white. And that's another reason why I think we see, right wing movements on the rise. And also on that note, it kind of reminds me of so I'm thinking of Zuckerberg and Kim Kardashian. So
Okay.
it's really interesting. So I thought about Zuckerberg when you were talking about, the stereotype of like an effeminate guy in IT, right?
Right.
So like if there's any guy that's been associated with IT, I think Zuckerberg is one of the big guys, right?
He's
And
definitely.
he's been doing a pretty big rebrand
I
lately.
have noticed that. Yes,
Yes, he's been right. He's
he's
been
gone
trying
from
to.
old
hmm
school and now looking like a frat boy. Yeah.
Yeah, he actually, yeah, I didn't watch this one, but my friend who had recommended Joe Rogan podcast to me, he was saying how like he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and he was talking about, oh yeah, like I'm doing MMA and stuff and I'm doing archery. And like my friend said that it was a little funny because like Joe Rogan's like, oh, like what bow do you use? And Zuckerberg couldn't answer it. And so Joe was like, how do you do archery, but you don't know what bow you use? But anyway, not the point. Point is that he's been having a very clear attempt at rebranding himself. And then I think of Kim Kardashian too, right? Because I think Kim Kardashian, you could make the argument that she very much like embodied this idea of like
The ideal woman.
femininity. Right, exactly.
It's actually it has been said of
And
the ideal she is the
right.
ideal
But
woman.
in recently, she has lost a significant amount of weight.
I,
And there's a whole discourse that I am kind of interested in. It's not exactly related to this, but it's tangentially related to like how femininity is redefined in times of like societal unrest.
yeah.
And so like a lot of times, so the argument, I think I watched a video on it, was that like Kim Kardashian losing weight is kind of her again trying to align herself with like power.
Yeah.
So like through history, like how women in power or wealthy women have chosen to present themselves trickles down to like everyone else. So like,
Yeah.
oh, that super rich famous actress, oh, she's got a mole, now moles are a thing, right? Like something like that. Like look at the Marilyn Monroe mole. You know what I mean? So people have been trying to say that like Kim Kardashian losing weight is her trying to align herself with the imagery of women who are at the top and they're very well off and they're also very thin.
Size zero. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so fun fact, dear listener, I've actually met Khloe Kardashian, for if you didn't know, and I did not actually recognize her. It's a story one day.
Really? Okay.
The story for maybe our Stranger Than Fiction podcast. Should we ever get to? Yes, it's a whole very funny story. So um, on a different note though, but there's an interesting video actually about that showcases how standards of femininity have changed over the years. There was actually a point, believe it or not, when more heavy set, like more heavier weight women were considered very desirable, actually.
I
Um,
very much believe that.
there was actually a time. I think it's a really good video. I think it's from Dove. Somebody did a research
Well, see,
project.
the thing is always the idea of what's attractive is always directly related to class.
Exactly.
Always.
Yeah.
So at a time when, I mean, from an Asian perspective anyway, like long nails, whether you're a man or a woman, at a certain point, that was very attractive because it meant you were rich. Being super, super pale, that was very attractive because it meant you didn't have to go work in the fields.
Right.
At a
Exactly.
certain point, being very overweight or very plump, that was very attractive, man
If you're
or
blocking.
woman.
Right.
Right, because you have a lot of food.
Exactly. And it's a thing, right? Like now it's considered a sign of wealth to be very fit because it means you have somebody who can take care of your diet and you don't have to just eat the first thing you come across, right?
hmm
And to tie it all back into like, our sort of discussion of masculinity, right? Like, and how we see this whole sort of weird thing going on nowadays. I will say Mark Zuckerberg's rebranding is very cringe. Like, just dude, just fucking be you, Jesus Christ. But like,
But you have to ask yourself why. Why is he doing that?
yeah, I want to say it's because of the right wing movement, but like, because a lot of
Hmm.
these tech CEOs have started very much kissing the ring, so to speak, which that deserves its own rant, I think. And I'm
It's a,
This is just
yeah.
power of me screaming at the camera. Um, but I think that the point that I'm making is that like we are kind of in a very delicate phase, I think, right? There are a
Mm.
lot of reactionary forces who, and here's what I'm going to argue, right? I think that like, and Emily and I talk about this a lot, but I don't know if we've mentioned in this podcast the depth of empathy in modern society, and this goes around for everyone, by the way, guys, is a big thing, right? Like, I think that there is a degree of empathy to be had for someone who's struggling, regardless of what their sort of um, historical like privilege might be, right? They may have had privilege at one point, but they are struggling now. I mean, that's still something we can have empathy for, right? I think that that is, and don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying that like, we should go and start kissing like our neo-Nazis next door, but like, the point that I'm trying to make is that like a lot of these issues come, a lot of these very reactionary things, right, come from a very genuine place. It's like we talked about earlier, like Emily mentioned earlier, they are talking about real problems, right? They
Yeah.
may not be giving good solutions. I totally think that they're full of shit on what they're saying, but they are talking about very real issues, right?
Hmm.
So I
And
think,
I think also it's the frustration with feeling like the historical powers that be, or like like the politicians in power, like they're not listening to them.
that
So
too.
actually, I'm gonna actually play devil's advocate to myself usually. So like I know when I was listening to the Joe Rogan episode with Bernie, like Joe actually asked a question more than once. He was asking for like solutions.
Right.
And really Bernie didn't answer them.
And
To be fair, Bernie was like, at one point he was like, I'm not as familiar with this, like I don't have the answers on me right now. But then the question is like, okay, so like where people who are really interested in those topics, like where do they go? Like who's
right.
talking about it? And so like if there's someone who's typically a Joe Rogan listener, they're gonna walk away from from watching that episode going like, okay, so there's still no answer to it. And then Joe Rogan, maybe in the next episode or a few episodes later, he's going to give them a more
Ridiculous.
compelling answer. Yeah, exactly.
It's
And
really
actually,
ridiculous.
one more thing that I thought about related to the what's his name, Andrew Tate, the Andrew Tate interview that I partially watched today.
Yeah.
He said something about how like basically speaking my mind, like me speaking my mind and you getting like pissed off about it, like that does not bother me like at all. Like I'm speaking my mind and this is a very masculine thing. So how he framed it was like the type of person that goes out there, they say what they're thinking, they
Right.
don't care if they're hurting feelings. He was setting that up as like a very, very like masculine ideal. And that
I,
immediately reminded me of Trump. That
that's
immediately reminded me of Trump.
and,
Yes, because
and you
sorry,
know,
just because this reminds me of sometimes where they interview some of his supporters and they'll say, "What do you like about him?" And I have seen more than one Trump supporter go, "The man speaks his mind. He says exactly not only what he's thinking, he says what we're thinking."
yeah. And well, that's exactly it, right? I mean, like a lot of it is
Hmm.
that he's saying straight up racist things, is not afraid to be labeled a racist. I mean,
Hmm.
I think there is a darker conversation there, right? Like there's a conversation about the more darker nature of how we are very much have a large segment of people who very much want to demonize other types of people. But so
Hmm.
here's what I will say, right? Like I think that what's interesting I think about, the whole sort of like Andrew Tates and whatnot of the world, right? Is like what's interesting to me is like when they say like that they speak their mind, they don't care what you say. I would be willing to bet you that many people, especially like, especially like for guys who are trying to get girls, most girls probably are not into that. They're not into someone who's being a dick, right? I mean, imagine like I mean, and for the male listeners out there on the podcast, who are maybe a little bit like unsure about this. Let me put it this way: if a woman comes up to you tells you you have a tiny dick, you're dressing awfully, and like you're a broke ass loser, would you want to date that woman? Right. Like, and I'm being kind of a little bit, facetious here, but like, you know, there is a again, right? Like empathy is not a bad thing, and I think it cuts both ways, right? Like just imagine the other way, right? Like, you're probably
Hmm.
not gonna want to date this person, right? Like that's not
Hmm.
to say you shouldn't be inauthentic, but there's a difference between being authentic and being a dick, right? You know.
I would
Um,
say empathy is, this was something that I really had to deal with when I first like started working out of college. And as you know, like I'm not gonna name names, company names, but I really did not enjoy what no, no, I'm not gonna say anything. But I hated where I worked. I hated the culture. I worked with some really great people, but I hated the culture that was there. And I identified that one of the things that was just like really rubbing me wrong, was just a lack of empathy.
yeah,
Like just a blatant lack of empathy among people. And it's like
it's very
that just
empowering. Yeah, and
yeah,
deployable.
yeah. And that was so scary to me because, I think that a lack of empathy is like the first step in us living in a society that benefits no one.
Yeah, exactly.
Because human beings have always relied on community. We are creatures of community. Like you can't avoid that, right? Like you can't go around that. You can't survive in the wilderness on your own. You always need
Absolutely.
someone, right? And I think like empathy is one of the strongest forces that we have to having a healthy functioning community. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone. It doesn't mean that you have to, live like someone else, but it's just looking at someone else and saying, hey, you know what? Like, I can imagine myself in your position, having gone through the things that you went through. And yeah, that probably was like unpleasant or shitty, or I wouldn't wish that for someone else.
And
And
what's surprising, right? Like, is that a lot of these reactionaries, in an odd way, they claim they don't have empathy, but they actually are actually using empathy, right? That's how they're getting so much
well, they're
traction.
using they're using empathy for selective groups.
Exactly, right. Selective groups, and they're also using it for their own ends, right? Think about
Right.
it, right? The reason people follow Andrew Tate is because he is empathizing with these problems, right?
Right, right.
Teaching people a way out. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I am saying that they're lying to you when they say that empathy is a bad thing.
Hmm.
What they're doing is they're basically using you. It's interesting. I watched a video about a former neo-Nazi. They did a whole interview of this guy. He talked about the recruiting process, and he literally was like, who are the guys that we're looking for? We're looking for the white guy, Joe Schmo, who can't get a girlfriend. That's literally, he's like, yeah, we have a term for that now, right? But that's
Oh,
who we
wow.
recruit back then. And this is like the 70s and whatnot, right?
So
It,
they're taking advantage.
of
They're
people.
taking advantage of guys who are down because they feel like they're not achieving what they could.
Exactly, right. And
Hmm.
that's the thing, right? It's always been this way. What's happened is now that with the internet and the fact that more people are struggling than they used to, there are
Hmm.
more vulnerable people out there.
Yeah.
Now,
And they're offering a very easy fix, right?
exactly, right. It's an easy fix.
Yeah.
And that's how populism works. Now, I do want to like kind of tie this back in. What can we do, right? I actually think that like, people like myself and Emily and other artists and writers out there, we actually have the biggest role in this, right? People
Yeah.
often say, what is the role of art? Why art is useless. We don't need a society with art. I mean, I have a thought on that. I'll get to that in a second, like, but I think that in this particular case, right? Like, I mean, we named a bunch of cultural icons who are men who are considered the archetypal males that everyone aspires to, right? Really, what's needed is for artists to kind of go back and build new foundations for this, right? The guy who, maybe is just an everyman, right? Like a little bit more of an everyman, a little bit more. If not an everyman, we still love our extraordinary, right?
Yeah,
But
we love our myths.
we
There's
love our
there's a
myths.
value to myths in
We love our
society,
myths. We
yeah.
love our extraordinary, right? But what we need is a new set of mythology, which is around, the guy who is maybe a little effeminate, maybe does cry every once in a while, right? Like does struggle a little, but ultimately maybe succeeds at the end. But I'm,
Hmm.
I'm, I'm not sure. I mean, not to pull Bernie Sanders here, but I'm not sure I have the answer of what that looks like. Right now. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I think that that's kind of what's really missing, right? And as for like what a society without artists looks like, I mean, I actually think that there is a real issue with that because what ends up happening is you will have people who are unwilling to interrogate the meaning of what they're doing, right? I
Right.
I
To
don't want to
reflect.
exactly, and I don't want to, and I know this is going to sound like a very sweeping thing, but you see this a lot in my country of origin in India, where there's very much of a rat race these days, right? Like it's about, all about leaving India, getting out, becoming an NRI, which means non-resident Indian, minting money, right? Whatever. But no one's really reflecting on, well, will that really make you happy, right? And I think that's where
Mm-mm.
art is very important, right? We need to really interrogate, what will being, a hyper masculine, big muscled dude who tells people to go fuck themselves regularly make you happy? I would imagine not for a lot of people. You think it will solve your problems. I don't think it will. But I think that
Mm-hmm.
this is where the role of fiction really does come in, and like to kind of sort of neatly tie this back, right?
To one of our previous podcast episodes about the
On our
value of
previous podcast,
fiction.
yep, on previous podcast episodes, but also I think more broadly, like what we talk about here, fiction is often a window into the stuff we're dealing with in the real world, right? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to process things when you mythologize, when you make things a bit more grander than life, you make it less mundane, you make it the stakes a bit different, more fantastical, whatever, right? I mean, like when people talk about when you read the Odyssey, right? It's not just a story about a dude trying to go home, right? I mean, sure, you do that every day. It's not a big deal, right? Like when you come back from work. It's a story about journey, about the journey and overcoming impossible odds and like, you know, getting to a happier ending, right? It's those kind of stories that stick with you. I mean, to, quote Lord of the Rings here, right? Like it's the stories, where there really is a lot of trial, right?
And look at Aragorn's masculinity. I
It's actually a good point, right? Aragorn is not toxically masculine, right? You know,
right.
and it's actually something they examine in cinematherapy. Insert for cinematherapy. The panel that I really admire, they talk about Aragorn's masculinity. He's actually a pretty
Yeah.
cool, right? He has empathy. He
Yeah.
is caring. He
He has honor,
is on. He
caring,
stumbles.
exactly.
He stumbles, right?
Humble,
He's humble, but he makes mistakes. He's not perfect, right?
self-sacrificing.
And also, like, he's struggling with the idea of going back and becoming king, right? It's something he's running away from, right?
Right.
I mean, we
Right.
need stories.
I think I read somewhere it's like actually I think it was a Trevor Noah podcast and it was like anyone who wants to be in power probably shouldn't be in power. No, it wasn't Trevor Noah. It was Subway Takes. I
Oh, yeah,
think it was a
yeah,
Subway
yeah, I love
Takes
those guys.
interview, and the guy was like, "We should do like a lottery for whoever's going to be the president, because then you won't have anything, you won't have any PACs involved, you won't have the campaign issues
I was
and all the corruption that comes with it." And it was like, imagine if it was just like when you get called to jury duty, except now, oh, by the way, you're going to be president for a year. And he's
we.
like, what's the worst that's gonna happen? There's gonna be someone there that is gonna ruin the country, someone there who doesn't know what they're doing.
I mean, that's already happened,
I
right?
don't
I
know.
mean, that was also it reminds me of like a Reddit thread. What job would be done better if you had to do it naked? And one of them was like politicians, because no old
Oh
person,
my God.
right?
Oh my God.
And like, I mean, it goes to show you what people are really fed up with in this country, right? But the point I think, really,
Yeah.
right, is that like there's a lot of discourse that needs to happen, and it needs to happen in a way where we approach it from a perspective of we want to understand people, right? Like, and it's hard, right?
Right.
I'm going to be the very first person to say that I am very guilty of not wanting to understand people, right? I have plenty of moments. You can ask all my close friends where I'm like, man, those people are fucking horrible because, they're espousing
Mm.
a particular agenda, which is very hateful, right?
Mm.
But I guarantee you most people are not born neo-Nazis, right? Like,
The thing is, people contain multitudes.
yeah,
So the thing for me is that, as I said, like I grew up kind of conservative and I've obviously like shifted since then. But what I would say is that because I grew up conservative and I had a lot of conservative friends and I would say my parents are more conservative, is that like I've held a lot of space for people who say conservative things or are still in a conservative place, right? Because like I understand why they felt the way they did. Now, that's not to say that I have tolerance for people who are outright like aggressively racist, aggressively, yeah, like neo, like I don't have tolerance for that. But what I'm saying is that the majority of people, like most people are good people. And I really think that right now, America, and then this is related to masculinity in 2025, like where we are is we're in a very divisive place. And that is intentional by powers that be. That's an intentional thing that we are here.
Yeah.
And I would just say that like at least to American listeners that it's not serving anyone. It's not serving any of us. The fact of the matter is that if we all are identifying certain things that we're suffering through that we're really not that we identify as issues in our society, you're
Right.
not going to solve that by demonizing half the country. It's just not going to happen. That's not
Right.
how that works.
Right. And I mean, this is what
So,
I mean, this is what I'm gonna say, right? To the dude, like in Missouri, right? Who's, I mean, I don't know why I'm choosing Missouri, but like it's a pretty right leaning state,
I was like,
right? I mean, and
yeah,
I'm serious. It's probably a pretty conservative state, right? I
yeah.
guarantee you that the brown person that's in America is not out to like destroy you, right? And to like,
Oh no,
and the
no.
person in New York City, right? I guarantee you that like the more sort of like rural individual who really loves Trump probably just is really upset with the state of the country, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And rightfully so.
It's hard, right? And it's hard to really bridge that gap, I think. I mean, because, we're all human beings, right? Like it's hard.
Right.
And I get it. I think the problem that really comes up is that we're asking someone to be the better human. And that's just increasingly becoming tougher because more and more we just kind of get kicked down and you're not there. I mean,
And you
I
know what's
don't,
not fair too?
yeah,
Sorry, in that regard, you know what's not fair about that? This reminds me about when they were telling us, like, save the planet, save the planet. Like, get the paper straw, reuse this, reuse that. And it's like, you know what? Yes, we do, as members of the society, we do have a responsibility to do our part. But you know what? What about the corporations?
right.
What about the corporations who don't
Absolutely.
give a shit because you realize how much more pollution they're putting into our like and it's
Absolutely.
like oh but the burden's on you. The burden's on you guys, right? So that's the same thing how I feel now where it's like okay, well the burden's on you guys, the regular everyday people to be civil and be nice and blah. But in the meantime, the powers that be like we're just going to continue like smashing you guys against one another. We're going to continue to rile you up.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this is where I'm maybe a bit pessimistic. I'm not sure there really is an easy solution, right? It's a big ask of anyone at this point to be like, put aside your perceptions of these people and of the other side and like,
Mm.
you know, and try to, build bridges, not bombs kind of thing, right? But like, I think it's hard, and I'm not fully confident we're really gonna get there anytime soon. But that said, like, it's still worth putting out there into the world that like I don't really I really do think that we talk, especially with respect to the sort of masculinity issues. A lot of times when you see people espousing that like we don't need empathy, it's stupid, we need to go back to this, or we need to be proper men, it's usually because of a deeper insecurity, right? Not just even insecurity, it's just a deeper struggle, right? I guarantee you, if
Mm.
tomorrow, we gave every, person out there who was looking for a partner, a suitable income, right? And time with which to enjoy that income, I don't think anybody really is going to give a shit about, and about
Yeah.
other really. I bet you that, because we're a bit more left leaning here, I can only speak from our perspective. I bet you a lot of like the more nuttier right wing stuff that you see these days would dissipate pretty fast, right? And
Yeah,
like
because you don't have the suffering to take advantage of.
exactly right. Like there's something that I think that people say, which is like meet people where they're at. I think that that's kind of the thing here, right? And I think that that's kind of where again the role of fiction is going to be, right? Fiction and media really needs to work on writing and not to touch on a potentially future podcast topic, but that is something I've noticed is that a lot of media is just not very good these days, right? We're kind of
Yeah, yeah.
tired of old tropes, right? Like, how many more times?
Support your local artists,
Oh,
support your
seriously.
local indie artists and your
Hey,
indie writers.
I do it. I picked up a ton of books from the Small Press Expo.
There we go.
I really love indie comics, right? Like, no, and I'm dead serious when I say this, right? Like that, a lot of this, what it comes down to is that we really do need to start building culture around what a kick-ass male is. It doesn't necessarily need to be the guy who's out
Hmm.
saving the world, right? some stories
And you
where,
know,
yeah,
yeah, I actually have a thought on this. I say this to Constantine a lot. So basically, my idea is that, like, so you know yin and yang, right?
yeah,
So in every yin, there's a little bit of yang, and in every yang, there's a little bit of yin.
yeah,
And I think, and then they call that, that's like, harmony, right? I think there's a lot of truth in that. Like, I don't think you can have a woman or a man who's completely in harmony and at peace if they feel like they're never allowed to explore the opposite. Like you're not allowed to.
yeah.
You will be you'll be judged, you'll be ostracized, you'll be yelled at. But it's like I don't think that's necessarily it's not tied to sexuality, in my opinion. Because like sexuality is one thing. Sexuality is who you're sexually attracted to, right?
Right,
So like if you're a woman who's sexually attracted to men, like
right.
biological men, but you just happen to really like, I don't know, short hair and super baggy clothing, and that's how you
Or
love to present yourself.
or you're super into punching, like punching bags, like boxing, right?
Or punching bags, right? Or if you're a man and you love poetry and you like to ballroom dance, like, but you're
um,
very sexually attracted to women.
yeah,
I think all power to you. I think that's actually a good thing. I think in all of these different activities, you'll learn something. You'll learn something from. So actually, there's a famous. I think he's Ukrainian Russian boxer, named Lomachenko, and he used to. I believe he used to dance before he did boxing.
I'm not surprised.
And so yeah, I think Jackie Chan also did the same, and I think Hugh Jackman also did the same. Arguably, all three men are quite manly men.
I will
But
say,
there is value in learning to dance. And the same can be true for women. There's value in going to, the boxing class. I
right.
say that as someone who may be a little biased because I like doing MMA. I've done it in the past.
My
But the
girlfriend
point
loves
is
boxing
that
too.
there's something to be gained.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah, my girlfriend loves boxing too, so it's like, but no, I agree. There's something to be gained. I mean, we're not going to be posting the video here, but like, if you see me, like, I have rings in my fingers, right? I have my ears pierced, right? I'm not like presenting as a stereotypical male, right? Like, but I can guarantee you that
Or
I'm,
maybe you're Metro.
I think I'm beginning to learn I might actually be Metro. Dear listeners, today Kunal learned he's Metro.
Do
No, but
you do you use beard oil?
I have not actually been, but like people tell me I should.
Okay.
I should give it a try at some point. But the point being that like, I can tell you right now that like I'm a straight male. Like this isn't like, something that is, gay or something. You can piercings look cool, I think, on guys, right? I think that it's a good,
Hmm.
I actually have more jewelry than
Hmm.
average dude does. I have like a bracelet on my
You
left.
probably have more jewelry than me.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
true.
have much
Actually,
jewelry.
yeah, it's true. It's dear listeners, I do actually probably have more jewelry than Emily does. I
Well,
wear
he's wearing more jewelry than me. Look at me.
my
I mean,
piercing.
they can't see us, but basically, Kunal has like a bracelet, three rings, and a necklace,
I
and I
usually
have
wear. I usually
absolutely
wear
jack
two.
shit.
I usually wear two
Well, I have
bracelets.
earrings.
I usually wear two bracelets, and I have a bunch of rings. I'm still collecting more. So, I mean, the point being that, right, like there is value in not being the stereotypical dude. So, I think on that note,
Yeah, and yeah, on that note, yeah, we got to wrap up. So, thank you for joining us for this episode of our podcast. We hope you found this interesting. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you see masculinity? Do you think that there's a masculinity crisis? Why do you think there's a masculinity crisis? Comment down below.
and
And on that,
also comment if your head is still in your ass and did you get it out? Because we have to bring that into every episode. And or did you pants anyone?
oh yes, that's important. You need to let us know.
But this was a little bit more of a serious episode, I feel like. So definitely comment down below on your thoughts. We definitely love to hear them.
And we'll see you guys next time.
See you on the next one, everyone. Take it easy. Take care. Don't stick your head in places that it doesn't belong. Goodbye.
Please don't. Bye bye.